Okay, Paul, looks like you are unmuted.
Well, I think I'm unmuted, and I think I have Ganesh Cherion's picture in front of you.
Yes, you do. First try. Good job.
Wow, first try. 6 years I'm learning how to do this thing. Uh, and I'm so pleased to welcome everyone this evening to the ongoing Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. Ganesh has been with us a couple of times previously on his remarkable book, which is um, a, a topical biography of Joseph Smith, calling him the architect of Mormonism. I strongly recommend the book. Well, many of you heard his earlier presentation, I'm sure. And then he also has given us the contrast between, or comparison between Mr. Trump and Mr. Smith. But tonight he's come back to share with us um, about the where I've lost my page there. Well, anyway, he's come back to share with us about the efforts that Joseph Smith was making to work out corollaries with other people. And I've missed the topic here, but nonetheless, um, that's roughly what it is. And he'll have a chance to clarify that after we have the prayer. Oh, wait a minute. Let me introduce him. Um, Brother Cherian is the former LDS bishop whose culture and tribe in New Zealand has South Indian roots. And that's where St. Thomas was buried. He has an Armenian name of Cherian, and he combines Christian heritage, for he saw Mother Teresa with his Hindu background from India. He was born near Nepal. His father drove a bus while his mom was teaching in New Zealand. The Book of Mormon validated him as a Christian, a Nephite type, who now has written a topical biography of Joseph Smith, the architect of Mormonism. He shows tensions between the book and his church and is willing with us to explain. And so, since I got to meet him at the John Whitmer Association and found a kindred spirit, he is presented on the architect of Mormonism and in contrasting Trump with Joseph Smith. And we welcome back our dear friend from tomorrow. Let us pray together. Creator, whose marvelous interconnections of micro and macro universes leaves us in awe. We see the transformation of the monarch butterfly from chrysalis into the spring thaw. We sense your embrace in love to make us whole, and we stretch ourselves to apprehend the eggs of life in your eternal soul. We come before you to invite your spirit, that we might amicable be, to listen to Brother Ganesh, to ascertain the collaborations in history that we can see, to learn to be in loving process every breath, every day, and to see within each other your presence, the Zionic hope for which we pray. And as we join our thoughts and minds, contemplating in this forum while spread around the world, we seek to be centered on you, our Heavenly Parent, upon whose banner we would be furled. For we seek to be agents collaborating that virtues increase, collaborating with you and each other to become the prophesied people of peace. We pray in the name of the Prince of Peace, Jesus. Amen. Hope I didn't want to go that far. All right. Ganesh sharing with us about the cooperation that Joseph Smith used in his early research studies and productions. And I think I get the other things out of the way so that we should be able to see you here momentarily.
Very good. Well, I'm very feel very privileged to be welcomed back, and hopefully I've got something really interesting to share with you today. I'm speaking again next month, so I'm doing two topics and doing one on each month. Um, there's the idea of collaboration, the ways in which Joseph worked with the people around him, and the other part that I was going to talk about is the composure in the text. Um, so I'm actually going to do the composure one first because I think that might give us a better grounding for for the correlation next time. And plus two, I've been going through the archives of some of your old um, interviews, and I picked up on one that was really useful, and I'll talk about it as I go. One with Val Larson that he did on the book of the multiple endings of the Book of Mormon from Moroni's perspective. And so we're just going to go through a lot of text today. I'm conscious that the text of the Book of Mormon is not the same in the Community Christ as it is in the Utah LDS Church. I have used the Utah LDS Church one just for my ease, but hopefully it will make a lot of sense, and you can see it in the ways that it'll come up, and you can you'll be able to correlate to the other editions of the Book of Mormon that you might more enjoy. Okay, I'll just share my screen and bring up this here. So this is, I'll just go to the right at the top. So I wanted to talk a little bit about repeated story or repeated story lines in the Book of Mormon. And hopefully it'll give you a good idea of what's going on behind the text. And we can discuss this. I'm hoping for your input, and you can just stop me at any time, of course. When one of the things that I am really interested in is the ways in which the Book of Mormon tells stories, and are there some things behind what we read that are informing the structure. And so this is a couple of things that I found that I think are really interesting, and that also point to an understanding that there's composition happening in the text. And I came across Val Larson's presentation, so he also talks about this at some level, and so we'll use some of his stuff as well from his presentation from before. I've been aware from a couple of storylines in the Book of Mormon that there are some repeats, some ideas that follow the same narrative trajectory arc and get the same conclusions. And actually, if you line them up side by side, you could see some incredibly close understandings. And so one of the ones I found a couple of years ago that I was aware of some of these. Well, this one I found was incredible because they're side by side. It's the story of Zenith in the Book of Mosiah, and in the LDS Utah version, it's Mosiah 9 and 10, and in the original 1830 edition, it's all just one chapter. This is the story of King Zenith that he tells in the first person, and it relates the idea that he goes from Zarahemla through to the land of Lehi Nephi, and he makes a treaty with a king, a Lamanite king, and establishes a community there. And then the king attacks. They have to defend themselves, and they run off the Lamanites, and they establish a bit of a kingdom there. Zenith is the first king in this particular line, and then Noah, his son, reigns after him, and then Limhi after him. But King Zenith's account of his people and his circumstance occupy these two story arcs, and they are exactly the same, or at least below the text there is a structure which informs the composition. And so here I've got up here on the screen, these are Mosiah 9 and 10. Okay, so here I put them side by side so you can have a look at them and see what's going on. We've got, uh, I've color coded them so you can get an idea. And this color code I've tried to keep throughout all of the examples that I'm going to give tonight. And that is yellow is exactly the same words. Green is not the same words, but the same kind of idea or feeling. And you'll see as we come down this side by side that we'll get to a list, and I've put that in blue so that you can see that the list lines up in the same order as well. And what's interesting about this side by side, as you can see, is it doesn't match perfectly, but um, where the ideas line up, they line up in order and in often exactly the same kinds of ways. So if I'm just going to scroll down here, you can see that the same wording is used in that yellow. There's these two different lists at the beginning of these chapters, but they're a list of 6 things. But as you scroll down, you'll see that the wording lines up again and again in the same order. It's very, very tight. And then further on down the chapter, we have another list of 6 things, and they are the same things, or almost exactly the same things. You'll notice number 5 there is clubs, and number 5 on the other side is stones, but otherwise they're exactly the same list, 6 things, and very, very close. And the storyline goes right down and goes all the way to the very end. They end slightly different, but the feeling is the same. So these 2 stories, or these 2 accounts of Zenith and his people, are actually the same narrative arc. And by putting them side by side, we can see that. They don't feel the same. They, when you're reading it, you can't see this, or well, at least for the whole of my life, up until I did this analysis, reading the story of Zenith, I didn't see that there was a story arc or that they lined up so perfectly. I just felt that they were similar but different stories. And the reason that these particular stories don't feel exactly the same is that in the midst of them, they have a laymanite explanation. So a kind of a tangent, and I'll go up so you can see where they are. I've outlined them in the text. So in the first example on the left, the laymanite explanation occurs quite early in the piece, just after verse 9. And in the second iteration, the laymanite explanation happens in verse 11. So it's a little bit further down. And although they're both laymanite explanations, they are 2 different laymanite explanations, in the sense that they talk about the Lamanites, but they tell a different story explaining why the Lamanites are the way that they are. And they're of different lengths. The Mosiah 9 length is just a few verses, and the Mosiah 10 one is quite a few more verses. But you can see that they have something in common, and that is that they have these kind of points, these 4 points within them that kind of share the same understandings or same wordings. And that suggests that actually it's composed differently, but it's composed the same as each other. So hopefully that shows distinctly on the text. There are some internal, repeated phrases and ideas but the bulk of it is basically these sets of four ideas. Any questions at this point? Is there anything that does that make sense? Does that is that a compelling side by side? Do the color codes help
Mm.
dissect it?
Yeah, Ganesh, if you would please, well, you point out there's a significant difference in the Lamanite insert,
Yeah.
and that's clearly why they look quite or seem to come across as quite different. And yet, to have all those parallels or identical, to follow the same arc, why would we have the two different inserts there? What explains the two different selections of Lamanite inserts?
I think that what part of the composition aspect of these two stories together is that there's some kind of memorized um, narrative points. So that's I've got when we go up further, we can see them there. There's 31 direct comparisons that are there, and so I think what you could do if you're an oral storyteller is to memorize, let's say, 30 points, and then you just hit those points in order as you tell your story and as you flesh out your story. It's kind of like many of you will watch comedians, and you've probably heard them on various different places tell the same joke, and so they know what the joke is and they know how the story is going to play out, but actually how they deliver it might be different from audience to audience, and so they can they know the crafting or the structure of the story, the the, the joke that they're telling so well that they can hit the points that they want to hit, but they don't necessarily have to do it with exactly the same wording or tell the story exactly the same every single time. And then in the midst of your joke or in the midst of your story narrative, you might take a break in the middle to go off onto some tangent and then come back because you know where you are in the sequence. So you just come back to the place that you've left and carry on your narrative arc. So those two Lamanite explanations, I believe, are tangents. They're ways to flesh out the story by giving some more information, but then the composer goes right back to the place in the storyline that they're at.
So you're suggesting then it's the same author at two different times in life.
Well, these two chapters are side by side, and in fact, in the 1830 version, they're the same chapter. I think that this is that may not have been the same on the same. Well, it may not all have been done in one session, like it could have been two different sessions, but they're probably done really close together, side by side, because these two narratives are side by side in the text. So let's say Joseph orally dictated the first instant in the morning and then dictated the second instant in the afternoon or the next day.
Very interesting. Thank you.
So, so this happens a lot in the Book of Mormon, although this particular example is side by side, and most of the other examples are some distance apart. But we can go and have a look at them and see what they're doing. So let me give you another example.
Ganesh, there's a question in the chat.
Oh,
It says, from a text critical analytical perspective, could we see a synoptic gospel problem, a gospel of Q issue? That's coming
yes.
from Michael Riggs.
Well, yes, that's a good question. Maybe it's possible. I'd be keen. I did talk to Val Larson about this, and he had that same kind of an idea. Um, he felt like this could be Mormon inserting his authorial understanding underneath the text to Zenith. But I don't think that's the case. Hopefully it'll become apparent as we go a little bit further along. Let me see if I can answer that as we go. Here's another example of a narrative arc which has the same ideas in the same order with the same wording. And this is the two stories. One is King Noah. This is from Mosiah chapter 11, and Riplikesh, which is in Ether chapter 10. So this is the Mormon abridgment and the Moroni abridgment. So if we have a look down here, we can see that the storylines about these two kings are almost exactly the same. They're not identical, but they follow the same understandings in the same order. There's a righteous father, the son who is now the king, who's not keeping the commandments. They indulge in wives and concubines, place heavy taxes on the people. They build spacious buildings and fine thrones for themselves. They engage in fine workmanship, but they afflict their people, and their subjects rebel against them, and they're killed, and any of their supporters are driven out. And that's exactly the arc that we see in both Mosiah 11 and Ether chapter 10. And I've just put a side by side so you can see that. And there are a couple of things that are out of order. See, this last one here, that he didn't inflict the people with his whoredoms and abominations, which is the last point in the Ether version, but it is further up on the Mosiah version. Oh yeah, there it is, right there. He did cause his people to commit sin and do that which was abominable, right there. So generally they're in order in these points, but they're not always in order. And so this suggests that whoever is using this narrative arc, maybe a memorized script, gets things wrong from time to time. And these two examples of this story exist in two different parts of the Book of Mormon. They would have been at least 2 months apart in their dictation. So it's pretty impressive that the narrative arc is the same and the points are generally the same. And I think we can, even though there is one out of order, generally all of the others are in place. It's pretty impressive. And then let's have a look at that. Here's another one that you may. This is a favorite. This is Cherian, who is in Jacob chapter 7, and Korihor, which is in Alma chapter 30. And these accounts, they're slightly different lengths, but they have the same beginning, the progression, characters, language, and outcome. There's an Antichrist who preaches. He leads away hearts. He converses with a high priest. He denies prophecy. He gets refuted. there's an appeal to the Holy Spirit. He asks for a sign. He's warned not to tempt God. He's struck down. He confesses his deception. He dies badly. And the outcome of all of this is the people are converted. And so this is Jacob 7 against Alma 30. And again, I've put them side by side. You can see just here, the beginning is not quite the same. The name of the person is given first in Jacob and second in Alma, but otherwise, the points line up very, very closely. The language is really, very, very similar, very close wording, and it ends with the same kinds of understandings. The devil deceived them, and they die. And so that's another one. Now this is different than the one we just had a look at. So we looked at story of Zenith, which is both are in the Mormon abridgment. We've looked at the Noah and Replicash, which are in the Mormon abridgment and the Moroni abridgment, and then this one is in the Nephi account and also in the Mormon abridgment. So there's these narrative arcs are transversing different parts of the text, which Val, when I talked to Val about this, he was hopeful that this was going to be an understanding of, the, Mormon being a great literary agent behind the scenes, but that doesn't seem to be the case, because these things transverse all of these parts of the Book of Mormon. Here's another one, and this is Ammon's mission to the Lamanites and Aaron's mission to the Lamanites, which are separated by just a few chapters. So they would have been written within a day or two of each other, in terms of being dictated. And these are long passages, but the stories follow, again, the same arc. They've gone to preach to the Lamanites. They seek to be a servant of the Lamanite king. The Spirit directs. They preach about the idea that there's a God, a great Spirit, that God's created all things. King believes. The missionaries rehearse the creation and the plan of redemption. There's some expounding that happens. The king prays and faints. The wife is notified. The king rises. The household is converted. The multitude gather. Sometimes the multitude murmur. Kings then speak, and Alma and Ammon administer to the people, and then the monarch gives access for the gospel to be taught abroad in the kingdom. So that's the narrative arc that's being repeated. And if you go down and do a side by side, you can see that there's the same types of text, which is being hit as the dictation is being done. I've chopped out a bit of text in here just because both of those stories are very long, and so it's just easier to take a bit out. But that gives you a good idea of the side by side. And these two are obviously in the book of Alma. We've had others in the book of Mosiah. All right, how you doing? Any questions about those?
So, what's the largest span of time in translation between these parallels that you found?
Well, within the Book of Mormon, it seems to be as much as 2 months. But there are some others, and maybe the next one will kind of give you an even bigger time frame that's probably at least 6 to 8 months. So here, if we can do this within the Book of Mormon, but we can also do this between the Doctrine and Covenants revelations and um, and the Book of Mormon. So here is the side by side for Doctrine and Covenants section 3, which was we believe is given in July of 1828. So this was after the lost manuscript was taken away. So this is a kind of Doctrine and Covenants section 3 is a rebuke of Joseph, and Alma chapter 37 is where Alma passes on the records to his son Helaman. The the interesting thing about these two texts is that they kind of deal with the same kind of idea, and that's the idea of record keeping, and that there's this ancient record that they have been entrusted with that they need to keep safe. And so we see that there's a real feel of Doctrine and Covenants section 3 in the text of Alma 37. And Alma 37 is probably done in April of 1829. So that's a good, actually probably more like 10 months between the two. So if I go and just show you down this kind of show you the parts side by side, you can see the beginning is a similar idea, but not exactly the same words. But then you see that there are some very significant crossovers. Again, some of these are not quite in order. We've got how strict the commandments up here, but we've got how strict the commandments down here. But you can see that they're the same. And
Wow.
this goes on and on. These are quite different texts, so they don't line. There's a lot of things that one text does that the other text doesn't do, but you see that they do line up when you put them side by side in the same kind of order.
Wow.
And there's more on this one.
Remarkable research, my friend. Wow, this is neat.
Yeah, so that suggests that this is not just happening within the Book of Mormon; it's happening with the Doctrine and Covenants revelations as well at the same time, or that the text of the Book of Mormon, in this case, is dependent on the text of the Doctrine and Covenants revelations. That's a tricky thing to reconcile. If you're thinking it's ancient, it does lend the idea that it's a lot of this has to do with Joseph, what Joseph is lending to the text.
How many of those parallels were there between the Doctrine and Covenants 3 and Alma 37?
Oh, okay. Let's go up and count them. Okay, so if we get, I'll count the green as well, but would you like me just to count the yellow?
I'll count them both.
All right. So
One,
one, two,
two, three.
3, 4, 5, 6. I'm just counting down one side. 7,
8,
8, 9,
9,
10, 11,
12,
12,
15,
13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 20.
wow. 20 parallels.
And they're quite different texts. Like, if you just read them, they don't feel the same, even though they're kind of dealing with a similar theme. Um, you know, preserving the records and keeping them safe and stuff like that. They are very, you don't see this, and well, you don't feel it unless you put them side by side and see the comparisons. I think that's what's really fascinating about these stories is they are just so um, yeah, people you don't see them unless you're actually physically looking at the text. This is Val Larson's one that he found that I was really interested in when I watched his presentation that he did in this forum. This was the idea between Omni 1 and Moroni 10, the idea that Amaleki was the last record keeper of the small plates, and that Moroni's the last record keeper in total. And so these are from him, and this is his uh, side by side in terms of the kinds of ideas that are being presented in with Amaleki and Moroni. And I've just done to his he did this when he did his presentation, but I've done it um, again my side by side just so I can use the same color codings and show you how it is similar to the ones that we have just looked at. So here's Omni 1 side by side for Moroni 10, and here are the he validated this when he did his presentation, but I've just done it so that we can see it in the same way that I presented the others. And you can see he is they line up side by side, and then you've got that list which the lists I put in blue. So here's the list, and Omni, which is he only lists four of these kind of gifts of the spirit, but they're listed in the same order in the Moroni version. And the Moroni version, obviously, very much more complex, or at least it's longer, it's more involved, it says a lot more things, but the lineup is still exactly the same. And so which suggests, and Val made that understanding that Moroni 10 was dependent on Omni 1. And of course, again, this is the Moroni abridgment against the small plates, the Nephi account. So two different parts of the Book of Mormon. I did another side by side for this. So when Val was doing his 5 endings of the Book of Mormon, the 5 Moroni version endings, he rightly so, and I hadn't picked it up, so it was a really good find. That Mormon chapter 8 verses 1 to 5 is a separate ending, and then Moroni goes on to say more after that 5th verse. But one of the things you can do with a side by side is that I can put that first Moroni ending, Mormon chapter 8 verses 1 to 5, and put it side by side with Ether's ending in Ether chapter 15, and you can see that they line up. So, I, Moroni, did finish the record, and well, this is Ether 13, and now I, Moroni, proceed to finish my record. So he's talking about that, and now he's describing the destruction of the people. There's that yellow; they're not in order again this time. but the idea that the Nephites hunted, and the idea that um, the Jaredites are being hunted. And you can look down the line and see them. Um, and there's some, I've put these ones in pink, which are the ideas and the wording are contained, but they're not in order. But you can see here that, um, you know, Moroni is talking about, I even remained alone to write the sad tale of the destruction, and Ether's being told, you know, he went forth and beheld the words of the Lord had been fulfilled, and that then at the very end, I will write and hide up the records, and Ether is hiding up the records in a manner which the people of Limhi did find them. So this is these two endings are based on the same kind of understanding and ending. The then Moroni says, "Whither I go, it mattereth not," and Ether says, "Or that I suffer the will of God in the flesh, it mattereth not." Um, so there's these two line up very well too. There's that idea of suffering. The Lord will suffer. So yeah, it's a bit more messy than the ones that we've been looking at so far, but all of the ideas are there, and the same wording is there, and the same ending is there. So that's quite. I was really happy to find that one, especially looking at Val's endings. But there are lots of these. I'm just so there, and there are all throughout the text. So I'll just go through them quickly because there's quite a few. These are smaller ones, so you'll go through them quickly. But here's King Mosiah in Omni chapter 1, versus King Mosiah, which is his grandson, in Mosiah chapter 25 and then 28. So here are the side by sides between Omni 1 and it's 21. And you can see where I've highlighted the text that they're the same. And then here's Omni 1 continuing the story, and here it is being continued in Mosiah chapter 28. Sorry, there's a lot of information. I hope it's not too overwhelming here. You might have to go back and have a look at this once we've published it. But here's another one. Here is where passages from Mosiah 7 and 8 are then reiterated in Mosiah chapter 21. And so I've put a side by side for this. So here's Mosiah 7 against 21. You can see that they're relating the same thing. They're actually relating the same incident. So it's not quite so impressive, but it's really interesting that it uses the same language in the same order. And here is one between Mosiah 8 and Mosiah 21. So there's the side by side. Again.
Wow.
And you can see it down there. Here's one that I think is quite interesting. This is Mosiah chapter 22. And this is one chapter. And so I had to split, but the repeat is within the chapter. So I have split the chapter in two and put one side of the chapter on one side and one side of the other, and you can see it again. I've labeled these ones A, B, C, D, and E, and you'll see why in a second. So here, this is all chapter 22. We've got this A version, We've got this B version, a B instance, C instance, the D instance, and then the E instance, and the 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 corollary on the other part of the chapter. So one side goes A, B, C, D, E. The other side goes A, B, C, E, D. And so you'll see it as we go across the page. This is only small, right? This is only 20, well, 11 verses. And yet we see this double up in the 11 verses. So here's one. This is Helaman chapter 6. Now, so this is deemed to be a chiasm, which means that it's, this is also in the same chapter. This is only a few verses of Helaman chapter 6, verses 7 to 13. And it's deemed to be a chiasm because the ideas repeat in the opposite order. And so I'll just show you. I've put some letters there next to them so you can see. Verse 7, we've got an A, B, C, D, E, and then the other verses, it goes the other way around, E, D, C, B, A. And so this is a narrative. There shouldn't be a chiasm narrative because it shouldn't be crafted. It's just history, right? So it shouldn't necessarily be crafted. But this is where I think that if you take, we've done all these side by sides where they're in the same order, but if you've memorized a pattern or a list of points, you could recall them forward twice, and that gives us these repeated stories, or you could record it forward once and then backwards the next time, and you get these chiasms. So I think that's quite interesting in terms of its the idea that a lot of these chiasms that we may have come to feel like they made the Book of Mormon quite special are actually just memorized points being repeated in the opposite direction. Here's there. I will go through these quickly because I know we want to talk some more. But here's another one. This is mourning and lamentation. This is Mosiah 21 again. There's a lot of Mosiah 21 parts, and here we see it in again the same ideas of mourning and lamentation in Alma chapter 28. So these two ones I've labeled them again with A, B, C, D, and E, because the second instance of this is actually B, C, D, E, A. So it's interesting that it's in the same order, but not it's not A, B, C, D, and E. It's B, C, D, E, and then A. So just showing that whoever's orating this is creative and flexible enough to be able to take the points and maybe even do it slightly out of order. This one is famine. There are two famine stories in the Book of Mormon. This is Helaman chapter 11 and Ether chapter 9. And you can see if you go down the list that they're the same points in the same order with the same wording. But they've otherwise got different things in them that make them feel slightly different. But you can see lots of points in this one the same. This one's Mosiah 1 versus Mosiah 7. So two different kings, King Benjamin and King Limhi. And they're going to proclaim to the people by the temple, and that also small, but it has the same points in the same order, the same wording, and you can see them there. The Mosiah 1 actually goes over to the second chapter, Mosiah 2, and it reiterates the same idea. And then in this passage here, and then continues on with the same points. Here's Mosiah 7 against Mosiah 9. This is talking about Zenith and the treaty that he makes. And here, same ideas, points being delivered in the same order. Oh, so there's lots of them. Here's another one, cast into prison. There's 3 instances of this. The first one's in 3rd Nephi chapter 28. Second one's in 4th Nephi chapter 1. And then there's also an instance in Mormon chapter 8, which is a bit more simpler. And you can see side by side in 3rd Nephi 28 and 4th Nephi 1. But then you can also see it's just a couple of verses in Mormon chapter 8 where it goes through the same points, just in a much more condensed version. Ether 13, this and Mosiah 17, and also 1st Nephi 3. This is the story of a king or a ruler in the case of Nephi that casts out the prophet, and we have the idea that they flee from the prophet, but they get away. And this is repeated. The purple bits are where those 3 stories have similar things in them. And then I've put. It's interesting that they both use the idea of, or 2 of the versions use the idea of cavity of a rock. I put the Mosiah 17 versus the 1st Nephi 3 versions side by side, and you can see that they also line up. But again, they have one that's out of order. Okay. Any questions about that? We've gone through quite a lot of examples. You may well be aware of these, and there are quite a few of them throughout the Book of Mormon. The idea of New Testament passages in the Book of Mormon. I've just taken a couple here. One from 1 Corinthians 13 through to Moroni 7. So this is Mormon speaking, and this is his kind of treatise on charity that is pretty much the same as 1 Corinthians 13. And there's a list in this, and so I've put the list in blue, and I've labeled the list. There are 13 points, and there are 15 points in the 1 Corinthians list, and 13 of them are carried over through to the Moroni 7 list in the same order. So there are 2 that are not used. But you can see that they're exactly the same order, and those line up too. And then I've also done the 1 Corinthians chapter 12 against Moroni 10, because this is the diversity, the gifts of the Spirit. And here I put the side by side so you can see them. There's 9 gifts of the Spirit, and they are put in the same order in the Moroni version. This is Moroni speaking this time in chapter 10. And there are 2 discrepancies. Number 7, the Corinthians version says to other discerning spirits, and the Moroni version says to another beholding of angels and ministering spirits. And then the 9th on the list is to others the interpretation of tongues, and in the Moroni version to another the interpretation of languages and for diverse kinds of tongues. So those are the 2 differences. But what I want to show in this is that they're side by side, also that there's enough ability for the person who's reciting this or dictating this to be able to tweak it a little bit in the ways that they want to.
No, that was Moroni, and what was the other citation, please, Ganesh?
So that was two Moroni versions, right? So that's um, uh, 1 Corinthians 13 with Moroni chapter 7.
Right. Then the second one.
And the second one is 1 Corinthians chapter 12 with Moroni chapter 10.
Yeah, that's what I want. Thank you.
Okay, so those are all, well, I think those are the most of the ones I'm going to talk to you about with the Book of Mormon. Can we see this in the Doctrine and Covenants sections, like the revelations that Joseph is getting during the same time period the Book of Mormon is being dictated? And the answer to that is yes. So here's a side by side with Doctrine and Covenants section 4, which is Joseph's revelation to his father, against Doctrine and Covenants section 6, which is Joseph's revelation to Oliver Cowdery. Joseph's father's one was done in February of 1829, and Oliver's one was done in April. And you can see here they had the same wording as you go down. Joseph Smith Senior revelation is quite short; it's only 7 verses. The Oliver Cowdery one, ends at the same place that Joseph Smith Senior one ends, but then keeps going on for quite a few verses. Joseph used that pattern again. Maybe he liked it a lot and memorized it. But here's Doctrine and Covenants section 6, which is that one to Oliver, against Doctrine and Covenants section 11 that he gave to his brother Hiram. So here they are exactly the same right through to verse 10, and then they go off with customization to those two individuals. Here is Doctrine and Covenants section 12 and Doctrine and Covenants section 14. This is to Joseph Knight Sr. in 12 and David Whitmer in Doctrine and Covenants section 14. And they start off exactly the same ways as those two previous, except that they finish at verse 5, and then they customize to the particular people involved. And just to finish that out, here is Doctrine and Covenants 15 and 16 side by side, and these are exactly the same, except that they were given to two different people, and so the only wording different is the name, and that is John and Whitmer in Doctrine and Covenants section 15, and Peter Whitmer Jr. in Doctrine and Covenants 16. So, and then was this used somewhere else? And I've put this one in, and this is years difference. So this is a bigger one. This is 1 Nephi chapter 1, the very beginning of the Book of Mormon, as we have it, and Joseph Smith's history in 1832. So they're 3 years apart. And the first vision account of Joseph Smith in 1832 follows very similar the understanding and what goes on with Lehi in the beginning of the Book of Mormon. And you can see here, just going side by side, and some of these are slightly out of order, but you see that kind of pillar of fire, brightness of new day is out of order, but jumped ahead there. So we've got a very similar trajectory for Lehi and Joseph Smith, and it's in many instances the same wordings. All right. Yeah. And the other thing that's really interesting is that, well, Lehi has this dream that then he takes his family and departs into the wilderness, and Joseph also, departs from Harmony, from Fayette, from Palmyra through to to Harmony. Okay, let's go to a question. All right, so yes, so do we have any questions up until those points? There are lots of smaller repeated scenes, and I'm not, just kind of type scenes, ideas that get recycled in the Book of Mormon. I won't go through them just because we've already been talking for an hour. Well, I've been talking for an hour, and you'll have some
Ganesh,
questions. Yes.
James Lucas has a question.
Oh, James.
Are you there, James?
Okay. Actually, I thought you were getting to the end. I'll just hold my question until you've completely finished your presentation.
Oh, we're pretty much at the end. I'll show you this quickly. You can go back and have a look at this if you want to. I won't speak to it just because there's just a lot of information, but lots of type scenes. The idea that there are scenes that are repeated throughout the Book of Mormon. So, and well, I'll just pick one so I can show you my favorite. This is my favorite. This is fighting like dragons for your wives and children against twice as many Lamanites. So this story happens 3 times in the Book of Mormon, twice when they mention the word dragons. And this is Mosiah chapter 20, Alma chapter 43, and Mormon chapter 2. But it's typified by this idea that the Nephites have to drive the Lamanites out before them, and yet they're not half as numerous. And they fight for their lives and for their wives and for their children, and like dragons do they fight. And we see that repeated again in Alma 43. They did fight like dragons. They were fighting for their homes, their liberties, their wives, and their children's. Now the Lamanites were more numerous, yea, by more than double the number of the Nephites. And they were driven. And then we see that again in Mormon chapter 2, except without the reference to dragons. So just these are kind of cute little stories that kind of repeat again and again. And some of them are one or two instances, or 2 or 3 instances, and some are multiple instances. And gosh, I've got way too much information. Okay, yeah, let's end it there. Otherwise, we'll go on forever. James, tell me what you wanted to know.
Okay. In modern literature, we value creativity, originality, uh, novelty. But my understanding is that in ancient literature, those were not values. And in fact, in ancient literature, the custom was to copy, repeat, and rework and reuse earlier literature that was thought to give authenticity and weight and dignity to what you were writing. So, Moroni had what Mormon wrote. Both Moroni and Mormon, according to the text, had access to the small plates of Nephi. And what you've shown here is that there is a great deal of consistency, repetition, and reuse of works from earlier writers, or and really we're talking about Mormon, Moroni, and the authors of the small plates of Nephi. So at least from that point of view, what you've shown to me shows the Book of Mormon is far more consistent with being an ancient piece of writing than a modern piece of writing as we would conceive it. So I guess that now I take your point that this is this would also be consistent with somebody spinning out orally a long text that he had to keep straight. But I'll come to that point in a minute if you'll allow me. But my first point is all of what you've shown here, as I said, is far more consistent with ancient writing than any of our modern conceptions of what writing is, where you need to come up with new ways of saying things, and you're valued for being more original and taking different approaches and so forth. So what would your, that'd be my first observation.
Look, you're absolutely right. You can see this in the Bible, of course, and there are lots of iterations of the same storyline being repeated. The case is also that in the Book of Mormon, and lots of people have written about it, that Abinadi's, understanding is a lot like Moses, and the kind of the typography of particularly Mosiah is that kind of narrative arc of an Exodus, and a Moses rhetoric. We also
and I'd point out, since Val isn't on, that was the point I think Val was making in comparing the end of the book of the small plates with the Morai's end of the big plates, was that it was deliberately, carrying them forward, carrying them forward and copying them to give it weight and dignity and so forth.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and absolutely could be the case. I guess the problem I have with that is that that this is consistent throughout. It's consistent throughout the Book of Mormon, but it's also consistent in the Doctrine and Covenants, and it's consistent between the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants, and it's consistent between the Book of Mormon and Joseph's writings later. Now, that doesn't mean that this could all. It just gets really miraculous really quickly, because in order to craft, for instance, the Zenith story in this particular way, and have it embedded in the text, is pretty miraculous, especially when it's first person narrative. So it's supposed to be Zenith's words, and yet you can see that it's exactly the same storyline side by side. And then go, okay, well, who's doing that? Who's that sophisticated a author to be able to do that? And then you have to come up with the idea that it's Mormon and also Moroni that are enabling this to happen, which means that they're pretty amazing in that regard. And also they would be incredibly great writers, but they tell us that their writing is not that good, and they tell us that they're worried about their mocking because of their writing. If Mormon and Moroni can be geniuses in that particular way, there's no reason why it couldn't just be Joseph. That's the person who's embedding this in the text, and his oratory style. These suggest an oratory production, not a written production. They're dynamic, they have words and phrases which are the same, but the crafting of the story is quite innovative and novel, which suggests that just like a comedy performer who might have points that they want to hit as they tell their story, they can still be innovative as they perform their text or their ideas. So to me, it looks much more like an oratory production of memorized points than it is a written text which has been crafted as a written body of work against each other. But I'd be happy to be shown that that's not the case. But these all look like oratory productions to me, not written comparisons which have been made. These are performances, not text developments.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but you can just flip that very easily.
Okay.
The volume of comparisons that you found, and this is excellent work. You've been very thorough. Would suggest if this was, I mean, you have two possibilities. Either all of these parallels, all of these similarities, all of these repetitions are either the result of a kid with a prodigious memory, or it's the result of people who have a written text and lots of time to go back and do comparisons and carry forward in the manner of ancient writers texts that they've seen before. Now, I'm of the school that Joseph was a very bright man and had a good memory. So I'm not going to say here, oh no, Joseph was a dummy, he couldn't have done it. But I'm just saying that it's also, in my view, consistent, and in fact more consistent with somebody who was writing, who could go back and consult, and who could go back and carry forward the patterns that he saw in the previous writing, just how ancient writers wrote. It just seems as logical or more logical. Now, but let me move on to a second point, which I wanted to make. So you note correctly that there are similarities, not just with the Book of Mormon, but also with other things that Joseph produced. Now, so I would, be interested in your view of this argument. So there are some of us, at least, who believe that the Book of Mormon is what we would call in translation literature a functional translation as opposed to a formal translation. In other words, that Joseph was actively intellectually involved in reframing the text as he was receiving it through the Urim and Thummim. Therefore, that there is vocabulary, language, phrases from Joseph and his, linguistic environment that comes into the text of the Book of Mormon. And I mean, the most obvious example is that he tracks the King James Version again and again. But even beyond that, I think that many people have shown that there's a lot of phraseology and terminology and so forth that comes out of Joseph's environment that's into the Book of Mormon. And as I say, those of us who believe that Joseph was an active participant in the translation, that's fine. That this proves our point. So the point that I would make here is that if that is the case, and if you believe that the revelations, for example, are again given to Joseph in the manner of his language, which is what it says in the Doctrine and Covenants section 20, I think, that the revelations will also be phrased in Joseph's language. And therefore, similarities between a Book of Mormon, in which Joseph was a participant, intellectual participant in the translation, and the revelations, which came to Joseph, but he expressed in his own language, would to be natural. That's what Joseph had in his head. That was the mental linguistic vocabulary that he had to work with. And it's not surprising that it be reflected in both the Book of Mormon and in Revelations. And later, as you point out, it would also be reflected in his rather limited literary efforts. It's like the 1832 account. So I'm just saying that I see a different explanation for all of this, and frankly, I find the different explanation more consistent with what we see. Unless, of course, you're for other reasons convinced that the Book of Mormon is a fraud. I mean, obviously, if you have other reasons for believing the Book of Mormon was created wholly by Joseph Smith, then this sort of reinforces your argument. But if I guess my point that I'm making, and I'm sorry to go run on and on, is that I see everything you presented here as explicable also and consistent with the idea of the Book of Mormon as an ancient text, but translated through Joseph Smith's mind, and therefore reflecting his linguistic, machinery, or whatever you want to call it, which would also explain the similarities to Revelations and other things that Joseph Smith produced, shortly after he did the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, well, those are all good points, James, and I do think that that's a possibility. I guess the question is, how do we test it? You've obviously thought about this quite a bit and thought about all the ways that um, we're talking about an ancient embedding composition or writing technique in the basis of the Book of Mormon, and then Joseph's infusion of his own language and understandings that are also coming over the text. How do we separate those two things out and decide or test, where is it coming from? For me, when I'm looking at these texts, I'm seeing composition. That's just what I'm seeing. It's the same composition that I use when I perform, and when I perform comedy. So I'm interested in it because I do this. I have to memorize certain points. I have to hit those points. That's the basis for the craft that I'm doing. And at the same time, I need to be flexible and innovative in the moment, because the audience is going to change. We're going to talk about the audience next time when I come and present next month. How does that change the text as well? Because the performance is different with a different audience, and so then those are things that I find incredibly interesting and fascinating. And how can I isolate it? How can I isolate the voices that are going on, and whose voices are they? Are they Joseph's? Are they the people in this household? Are they ancient American figures? Are they voices that are echoing through the Bible, particularly the King James Version that he has access to and is part of his spiritual DNA? So I'd be really interested in your tests to try and isolate those kinds of things and determine which voices are where, or if there's one common voice. The composition makeup suggests to me that it's a common voice, but I'm happy to be shown that it's multiple voices using the same technique rather than one voice using a particular composition.
Well, one way to test it, which neither of us are going to be able to do on this call, but I would point out that you've shown us a lot of text and highlighted very helpfully with the colors. That's very helpful to understand your point. But even in the examples you excerpted, there were pretty extensive blocks of white text.
Yes.
And if you were to take your examples and superimpose them on the entire text of the Book of Mormon, to show all the places where there doesn't seem to be any real parallelism or oratorical repetition or whatever, you'd have a huge amount of white text. So I would suggest that, I mean, one way to analyze it would be to say, well, okay, so this is true of some percentage of the text, but there's another much larger percentage of the text which isn't really doesn't seem to reflect this particular explanation. Now, I don't have that information on the top of my head, and won't blame you if you don't either. But I would point out that this is the same problem that comes. There are people who have argued parallelism, right? There's the first book of Napoleon and the late war. There's texts that were around in Joseph's time that he may well have been exposed to, which people have said, oh, that's where he got the Book of Mormon from. And yet, if you do, analysis, and people have done these alternative texts, it's, again, there's huge amounts of white space. So in other words, the people who are making the argument, they'll cherry pick a piece of text that's similar to the Book of Mormon, and then they'll say, oh, look, that's here. And then they'll jump 20 pages and say, oh, and here's another place where text is the same as in the first book of Napoleon or whatever. Yeah, but if you actually look at it against the entire text of the Book of Mormon, those arguments look cherry picked and selective and not very convincing, because in fact, it's just, you're going to have some similarities because stuff is all in the English language. So, it's almost becomes that ridiculous that it's just, of course they're going to use some words that are the same, because otherwise we wouldn't even be able to understand each other because it's all in the same language. So, I mean, I would suggest that those are some kinds of tests that we might be performed to check this out. But obviously, that's a much bigger project than anything we can undertake on this call here, especially since I've run on and on and on, and I happily defer to anybody else who has questions or comments.
I do take your point, James. There is, these are, this to me is a particular story composition, and it happens a lot in the Book of Mormon. But you're absolutely right that it doesn't happen everywhere or to every bit of text, as far as I can tell. But it's a notable one because it happens frequently, and so we can at least track those. And like I said at the very beginning, actually, people haven't found these, because when you're reading the Book of Mormon and you're feeling it more than you're maybe even comparing the text, you don't even see these. One of the great things I think that is good about this particular analysis is that it's internal, right? We're generally mostly comparing internal texts, the Book of Mormon with the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants with the Doctrine and Covenants, Joseph's, and then there's a few crossovers that suggest that there's something else to be investigated. One I could show you just, which is probably further on down here. We didn't go through, but one that I have been trying to do what you're talking about, James, is this is the Book of Ether against the Book of Mormon proper, because although the two texts are massively different in length, they have lots of similarities. The Jaredites and the Nephites, they start off in a wicked environment. They leave with a small group of family and friends. They journey in the wilderness, guided by supernatural means. They create vessels. They cross to the promised land. They split into factions. There's numerous wars. There's wicked kings. There's secret societies, and then there's utter destruction, or at least in the case of the Nephites and the Jaredites. And so you can I've gone through and tried to kind of give an idea of when something in the Book of Ether is referenced with the same kinds of wording in the Book of Mormon proper. And so here's just my initial attempt to do what you're talking about, James, by using this internal metrics. And so I've gone through. It would be too long to go through this individually, but you can see that there's lots of passages in Ether that are repeated in other parts of the Book of Mormon, with the same kinds of ideas and even the same wording. So these suggest that Ether was done in a hurry, and that it was done with the Book of Mormon proper in mind. And
although actually under the Mosian priority theory, Ether would have been written before Nephi. So
correct. Yes. Yeah, and I know in order to put it side by side, you have to put yes, that's true. That there are some things that maybe Ether might, well, if you're trying to look at dependency, Ether should be dependent on the books of Mosiah right through to Mormon, and then First and Second Nephi are going to be dependent on what's written in Ether. So yes, absolutely.
So again, I just make briefly the point that now if you go back and take the text on its own terms, Moroni would have had access to the small plates. And since he's telling in Ether the story of one of the foundational origin stories of one of the Book of Mormon peoples, very important Book of Mormon peoples, it would be natural from an ancient literary point of view for him to deliberately track the story of the foundational story of the Lehite peoples. But again, I think you have done some signal work, because I could very well see someone trained in literature looking at that and doing what Val did with the end of the small plates and the end of Moroni, showing that there are deliberate parallels. And you've done the groundwork here for someone to make the argument that Moroni was deliberately tracking the foundational story of his own people when he was telling the foundational story of the Jaredite people. But I've been talking, and I see Paul has his hand up. So
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
All right, fine, thank you. And I do want to address both of you because, if I recall correctly, James Lucas and Jonathan Neville presented several hundred parallels between the writings of Jonathan Edwards and Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. And it strikes me that what Ganesh is doing here is really an extension of the same exercise. And that raises the question then. I think I heard James indicate the possible challenge that the Book of Mormon might be a fraud based upon the comparison, and I would see the two as raising the same question, but I don't see that as the answer, and I want to give Ganesh a chance to address that part more particularly, because I didn't think that was his intent, but we want him to speak for himself.
Well, it is my book that we've talked about before, The Architect of Mormonism, suggests I do believe that Joseph is the most significant factor in all of the things that have gone on with the beginning of the church and its development through into Nauvoo during Joseph's life. And the Book of Mormon is a key part of that. I do think that, fraud's a very big and emotional word. I
apologize for using it. Let's say that the question is not is it a fraud? The question is, did Joseph Smith compose it? And let's just let's use that kind of language and leave fraud aside. I apologize for having used that.
No, it's a valid a valid thought. Yeah, and I do believe that Joseph is responsible for the text of the Book of Mormon, or that's at least what I see when I'm looking at him, when I'm looking at his life, when I'm looking at his environment, when I'm looking at his family, and I'm looking at his circumstance and experiences. And so, this for me, looking at the text in this kind of way, side by side with itself, is another confirmation to me that there is a crafting, composition happening, and I'm I think it's reasonable to suggest that that's Joseph, and until proven otherwise. I do like the idea that there's other factors, and I want to know what they are, and I want to isolate them, and I would like to see where that is, and then if he is crafting and composing and sharing his particular view on the world. How does that change maybe the ways that we engage with the text? Do we, we're obviously all a little older than he was when the text was written. And to me, it reflects the understandings of a 24-year-old young person who has aspirations, but also was also concerned about his world, and the development of the church under his leadership develops as he develops. So that provides a real good connection and key to understanding the text and its benefits and also its limitations. And I think that those are things that I'm really interested in knowing. What are the good bits because he's there? What are the more challenging aspects? What are the things that we might even discard because he's a 24-year-old and his life experience is very limited at that particular moment.
Well, let me thank you, Brother Lucas, for modifying the word and approach there. But let me take the other side of this, because in introducing you, Ganesh, I made reference to the Book of Mormon validating you as a Christian. I think I got that from you earlier, but help us understand if that is correct. To what extent did the Book of Mormon help to validate you as a Christian?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, and I've spoken about it several times, that I think I came to Christianity via the Book of Mormon, more so than probably the Bible. So yeah, I heavily believe my feelings about God and certainly about Christ are because of the Book of Mormon and its and the ways that it talks about Jesus. I In saying that, I think that that's because that's what Joseph was doing. He was trying to figure out his Christianity in the Book of Mormon and figuring out what it was that Christ meant to him through this idea of these ancient inhabitants that he felt very connected to, probably because of the ways in which he transversed the landscape around him and dug in the earth as a treasure digger, as he talked about ancient American and Indian artifacts and culture, and so yeah, I think that that's absolutely what happened to him, and so I think that's why when reading the Book of Mormon that happened to me, and it happens to lots and lots of other people too. I guess that the question is, what are the limitations on that? What are the benefits of that? And also, can we dissect that a little bit so that we can get some greater understanding, some better uh, beliefs, some good ways to interact with the world and people in it.
Thank you for that clarification.
We have another Question. Oh, did need to take the dog out.
No.
I'll jump in and make a quick commentary on what you just shared with us, Ganesh. I just happened to have been listening to some podcasts describing how it was that J.R.R. Tolkien brought C.S. Lewis to become a Christian. And his argument was, a literary argument. In other words, he was saying, look, Jack, that was Lewis's nickname. You're, a scholar of ancient myth, and you find these ancient myths to be you're very impassioned by them, and you feel that they provide meaning to life. And so I'm just telling you that this very power that you find in this ancient literature that you have spent your life studying is in fact comes from the fact that those are real. And therefore, then the Christian story is, of course, the ultimate culmination of all of these ancient myths and so forth that of a dying and rising God. And that was the path that kind of gave Lewis the pathway he needed to come to Christianity. Although Tolkien was disappointed it didn't lead him all the way to Catholicism, but nonetheless, it produced one of the great popular advocates of Christianity of our time. So so the Book of Mormon, maybe I hear your story, and that just brought that to mind, and maybe you can look at that as being a similarity. Your path to Christ has some precedent. Let me say that it that way.
I can imagine lots of Christians feel that way about Mormons in general, right? That the Book of Mormon's brought them, to some form of society with God and Jesus. But it's just a pity that they haven't got all the way and become born again in the Christian sense. Yeah, I love Tolkien. I love C.S. Lewis. I think there's a lot to be said for the Tolkien series. It's really interesting the differences between C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, especially when it comes to their depth of theology. C.S. Lewis stuff, really childlike, very easy to understand, and the similes and metaphors are really clear. Whereas Tolkien stuff is really embedded in that kind of understanding of myth and that deep theological understanding. In fact, it's almost like Tolkien infused Christianity into this mythical world that he created in such a way that you can read Tolkien, of course, and not feel like it's about God and Jesus at all, except if you understand Catholicism and its real deep theological roots, and then you can see it everywhere. So it's a really fascinating scenario. Whereas with C.S. Lewis's work, of course, you can absolutely see that Aslan is Jesus, and that there's a sacrifice there. They're very forefront metaphors that mean that it's really popular and especially great with kids, and it's really feel good, but it lacks a great deal of meat and depth that I think that Tolkien's work does. I think Joseph is somewhere in between in the idea that Joseph has this worldview, a really deep magical worldview, we would call it folk magic or Solomonic magic. He's really a magician. To me, that's my impression of Joseph, and I've written a whole section in my book about folk magic, and so that's his deep worldview. And once you understand his deep worldview, you see it everywhere in the text. Where I think lots of people who read the Book of Mormon rightly so, only see the direct parallels in the actual speaking of Jesus, which appears a lot in the text. But when you understand his mythological worldview, you see that embedded in the ways that he's, that is in, just like these stories that I've shown, they're the building blocks or the construction or the structure of the text rather than just the words on the page. So yeah, I'm really interested in that, and have been doing a bit of work on that in that regard. Yeah, which I might be able to present some later time.
Well, I'm sure we'd be very interested to hear that. I don't know. Paul, we don't want to hold you up from your you have to go to work tomorrow.
I do.
So I thank you for your presentation, Ganesh, and thank you for having this conversation here. I hope I haven't completely dominated and deprived other people of time to talk, but that is very interesting, and thank you for your insights.
You're very welcome. And I'm happy to talk offline about some of these things too. I'm interested in how to qualify what it is that I've finding. Also, are there better explanations? And also, how can we, like I said before, how can we test them to check? Because it's important for me to have some mechanism of validity in there.
Well, let me thank you, Ganesh, for taking the advanced step of bringing in the composition process. I'm going to look forward to the correlation process in your next presentation, and so making that shift is fine. I appreciate your willingness to do it, but more especially, let me thank you for the phenomenal amount of research you've done here to pull these pieces together and the side align them so that we can see them side by side and recognize not only the parallels of the Book of Mormon, which I think all of us were somewhat aware of, but to find those parallels between the Doctrine and Covenants and the Book of Mormon, it really is striking to recognize the process of duplication, the power of duplication, and the potential for us to try to better understand our history when we look at things like this. And so, yeah, you've given us a perspective that I think is extremely valuable. I thank you so much for sharing it with us. And I don't want to cut off discussion if there's anybody else with a comment or question, but I suggest we, get the whole forum available for people to look at each other for a moment. And now that we can see each other, if there's anybody else with a question or comment, please bring it in. Otherwise, we are approaching 9:45 my time, and because I get to make the trip to Iowa before 10 o'clock in the morning, then really I'd like to sleep a little bit before then. If there aren't any other questions or comments, then let me sing a stanza. We limit not the truth of God to our poor reach of mind, to notions of our day and sect, crude, partial, and confined. No, let a new and better hope within our hearts be stirred. The Lord hath yet more light and truth to break forth from his word. That hymn which takes us back into the 1800s, certainly into the Victorian period, one that our predecessors have sung. And as I look at the spiritual DNA of the Smith family and try to work with that and live with it and try to promote it for people, to see that there's lots of ways by which we can look at our history. But to be able to look at it appreciatively and to see that there's a legacy there that is arcing us toward peace is something that I think our world needs to see. For there's just an awful lot of conflict in our world today. Just not a lot of people believing that we can be people of peace, but I believe we can. And a discussion like what we had this evening that margins on potential discord and yet comes out with amicable relationships and I think appreciation for the phenomenal amount of research that Ganesh has done here speaks to us of the fact that we may very well have plenty of room to disagree and yet not be disagreeable. And so, Ganesh, thank you again for exposing us to angles that we probably haven't ever looked at before, most of us. And so, most of us have been pretty quiet tonight. James and I have gotten to cover all the questions, I think, and so certainly want to give anybody else a chance. Oh, that's right, Mike Riggs got one in on the chats, but it is just simply amazing to me to see the remarkable research that individuals do across the spectrum of the movement, and your demonstration tonight is a good example of that. Thank you, sir. Thank you, my friend. We will look forward to the next presentation, looking for the corollaries. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, unless there's questions, comments, you want to talk privately, it's time to shut off the videotape and make it so that we can